coming, the sun's zooming in, meltdown expected, the wheat is good then, engines stop running, but I have no fear, cause London is drowning. I live by the river.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the By the Minute Arsenal podcast. It's not been a good week, there's no hiding it. This has probably been the worst week we've had since doing one of these. I think we've had 2 defeats before, but not perhaps in quite such a pathetic manner as we've had this week. There we are, I'm editorialising already. Well, let's get on with it. I am Matt H. With me is Matt V. Hello, Matt.
Hello. Usually I'd say good evening, but what a week it's been.
Yeah, we'll get through it. We'll struggle through it together. I'm just hoping we don't have too many more of these this season. I'm not sure I can handle it. And live from Nottingham on location is we are joined by Pete. Hello, Pete.
Hello, Matt. I'm out of my sick bed for you.
Yes, battling, travelling for work and a heavy cold or something more serious. Pete is manfully carrying on for us, which is very good of him. Right, well, let's get on to... Sorry, go on, Pete.
More than Mesut Ozil would do.
Yes, you're still there. I can sense already a theme developing through the pod. We should also note Matt is struggling with a leak as well, but
yes, if I do disappear halfway or mid sentence, it's because they've knocked on my door and they've come to fix a problem which really is minimal, but they're determined to move me. So if you just hear screams, send help in the Exeter direction.
Well, there we go. Well, we've set the tone already for some slightly surreal background to the pod. Let's get on with it then. We're going to review the 2 games, but we'll also, as I've said to the podders, feel free to complain, whine, moan about any aspect of this, because it's not been a good week. And I think the overarching any bad Arsenal performances, particularly when they come back to back, and particularly when they're quite as insipid as they were this week, is the background immediately is, well, this is what always happens to Arsenal, this is what's happened for years, blah, 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 blah. So we've got all that in the background. But let's kick off with Watford. So it was Watford at home last Tuesday night, and Arsenal lost 2-1. And Arsenal deserved to lose 2-1. They were, to my mind at least, they were a shambolic performance. Watford were better in just about all areas. The first half in particular was pretty shambolic. It's difficult to know where to start. Pete, you were there.
I was, unfortunately.
Was there anything... The game I was watching, the crowd seemed as up for it as they normally would be on a nice winter's evening after you've been in the pub for a couple of drinks. Everyone's ready for it. What was going on? Why was it so terrible?
It was raining a lot, mostly. That was the main problem, I think. And that we decided to have another one of our very bad starts that we had avoided somehow in the previous game, the FA Cup game. Basically, by changing the entire team, we'd managed to actually start well for once. But we decided to revert back to the normal team and put Giroud up front and went straight back to, let's not bother to play football for 45 minutes, as far as I could see. It didn't really get any better all the way through the first half. It was entirely forgettable and horrible.
The Giroud, I wasn't going to go through team news in detail, but obviously Giroud starting was the key factor in that it told us that obviously the shape of the team was going to be different, or at least the key people were going to be different, i.e. Sanchez wasn't going to be where we would expect him to be, or where he's been for some time. Why that was going to happen, we don't know, whether it was just resting players before the game against Chelsea, or whatever it was. Matt, any particular thoughts as to why we saw Giroud here? Was it just it's that kind of game that will suit Giroud?
I have no idea, really. I've seen a few people say Giroud saved us this season, but it's because he's started that we've needed saving. I think there's probably some truth to that. I think his strengths lie late in the second half when teams have dropped deep, and he can come off the bench and make an impact. But I think we're a lot stronger when we start with pace up front. And I feel like Giroud got his run of games just before Christmas, starting, and he did well with those. And I feel like Wenger didn't feel like he could drop him because of the form he was in. But I think it's to the detriment of the overall team when he does start. And that's not a dig at him as such. It's just that I think the players around him benefit more when we start with someone like Sanchez up front.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we've seen that so many times this season. It seems like the obvious thing to say, but I guess Wenger would say they need to rotate, they need to keep people fresh, all the rest of it. Which, when you've got a few days before the next game, I'm not sure I completely agree with that on this occasion.
That was what really annoyed me, though, because I just didn't see the need for it. I think we've been using that, as I said before, as a warm-up for the Chelsea game to play the way that we wanted to, and that's why we shouldn't have been playing Giroud. No actual criticism of him, but just because if you don't want to be going into the Chelsea game playing him up front, why do you start the game before with him? You want to be trying to get the team working well in a system that you want to take into that game. I think the other problem was we haven't mentioned was that we don't have a midfield at all at the moment. I mean, Coquelin and Ramsey was never going to work, and it never has. And Ramsey coming off after 20 minutes wasn't helpful either. But to not have and I think that there were other problems that I just think Wenger thought he could get away with it. Basically, he just thought, this is Watford, and I can get away with resting a few players here. And I just don't know why he did. I just thought, no, you should have gone as strong as you possibly can, because actually in the scheme of things, the Watford game was the more important one. I think we would all accept losing at Chelsea, which I'm sure we'll come back to. But that losing at home to Watford under those circumstances was pretty much unforgivable.
Yeah, well, I think you've said it all very well there. I mean, it's going to sound patronising and obvious, but we need to say it. Watford were very good. They were very well organised. There was a bit of luck for their goals in terms of rebounds and balls falling to the right people, but they made the most of it. We then did get one back through Iwobi when there was still over half an hour to go, and I think the frustration was whilst we were a little better in the second half, we didn't have one shot on target in the first half at all. We were chasing the game for all that time, and I don't recall any real chances we had to equalise, let alone go in front.
I don't.
Carry on.
Thank you. I thought it was great at the start of the second half on the left-hand side. I thought he was really dangerous, but then we brought Perez on and moved Iwobi into sort of centrum with.
Oh, that's the leak. Had a bad effect.
As we possibly can, and hoping that they sort of form a formation themselves, and just through sheer numbers of attacking players we can burst through. But I feel like once we took Iwobi, sort of petered out, because obviously we had Gabriel at right back, so our usual threat through Bellerin wasn't there, and it meant that it effectively meant that the storm that looked like we were going to perhaps create, because I thought at the start of the second half we were pretty good and we could have come back. In the end, from the sort of 65th minute onwards, it didn't ever really look like we were going to get anything from the game.
We lost you for a couple of little chunks there, but I think we got your point about moving things around and not looking particularly great for that last half hour, and sort of expecting that the players you put on are going to sort themselves out, whereas perhaps they're not quite ready to. Sorry, Pete, you were going to say something, I think, before Matt came in.
Well, I would agree about the Iwobi moving into the central position was where we stopped looking like we had any further threat in that second half. The one other chance we had to equalise was, of course, the Lucas hitting the crossbar. But,
of course, yes.
And again, he looked pretty good, but there you go. Why he didn't feature again? Why he wasn't even on the bench against Chelsea? I've got no idea. Well,
this comes on to a question I had, a slightly more general one, about this idea of flexibility or not in the team lineups. So you start with Giroud, but perhaps Lucas has done enough to start a game. And I'm not picking on those two in particular. I'm just thinking as an example. And that was a great shot. It was unlucky that they were denied by the woodwork, but I don't know. Could they have done things differently? If you want to do things differently, stick Lucas somewhere. I mean, I don't quite know how you would move people around appropriately, but he's looked busy and lively and useful every time he's been involved in a game, I think. So it's disappointing not to see more of him.
Yeah, I quite agree. I think it's and considering that he doesn't get that many games, it's amazing he puts up with it and still comes out and plays hard and plays well and looks like he's up for it all the time. It's a shame he didn't start against Watford. I think that might have been a way to get a nice fluid, flexible front three against Watford without necessarily having and still get to rest someone maybe.
I mean, some of the notes I've got from the game, we had no one in the box. Now I don't think literally we didn't have anyone in the box, but all the time I was looking up and there just didn't seem to be people really making those runs, getting in there, getting involved. It just was that kind of, there's no penetration again, there's no thrust, there's no one really getting in there to cause any great threat to the Watford defence, even though the Watford defence were pretty well organised.
Yeah, I was a bit surprised, a bit like how we had no Lucas against Chelsea, that there was no Welbeck for the Watford game. I don't know if that was just managing him when we came back from injury, but I feel like he offers that directness and sort of purpose going forward as opposed to always cutting inside that we see from a lot of our players. And I feel we probably missed that, but I guess he's been out for a long time. You can probably understand managing him, but yeah.
Sorry, I was going to agree, actually. I had a little note about the fact he wasn't even on the bench. I thought was a bit ridiculous. I can understand the idea of keeping an eye on things, but it just seems Wenger wants to trust these players, and I think sometimes he needs to be a bit more ruthless and say, right, you haven't done enough. We've talked before about his loyalty to players, how if somebody, not loyalty so much, but giving people a chance, if a player comes in and does well, he'll stick with them. But there's the other flip side of that, which sometimes perhaps he, to my mind at least, isn't getting rid of people as quickly as he could. And I don't mean forever. I just mean, take a couple of games out, we're going to try something else. He wants to stick with those, with the 11 that he starts with. Obviously some tweaking here and there, but so I get the impression someone has to have a lot of bad games to then be dropped, which perhaps isn't the way it's done elsewhere.
And I think that's, for a lot of players, that doesn't seem to be the case. Like the likes of Oxlade-Chamberlain, I always feel that if he has like one or two bad games, that's him dropped. Whereas you mentioned, that there are other players which they can have continuous sort of average games, but they always seem to be guaranteed of a starting place.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm getting at. That it's those kind of issues that don't seem fairly those ideas aren't fairly used across all the players. Yeah, so there's some favourites, which is fair enough, but it's a little disappointing when it happens, when you think if we did something a bit differently, things might have been better. I mean, I've got a note also about Mesut Ozil. I know he's one of the lightning rods of criticism in this kind of game. I didn't see him do anything particularly impressive. Am I being unfair, or was he sort of out of the game as much as everyone else was?
Yeah, he doesn't like the rain by the look of it.
It seems a little unfair just to bring it down to that. I'm just actually trying to find his stats to see what they were like. Well, I won't go through the details, but pretty poor. He had one shot. He had a fairly good pass completion ratio, but they weren't sort of particularly killer passes by the look of it. And in fact, there was a lot of loose ones, and the ones that didn't work were the ones in the sort of the attacking third. So anyway, let's not focus too much on the Watford game. We think maybe it's one of those things, disappointing evening, but they do happen. Chelsea drew, of course, at Liverpool that evening, which certainly gave me something to cling to in my more optimistic phase. But then, of course, we had the Chelsea game on Saturday lunchtime. Arsenal, of course, lost 3-1. The one was right at the very end as well, so it perhaps is a slightly flattering scoreline. Where do you want to start with this? There was obviously a form difference between the two teams going into the game. The Watford result didn't put us in a good footing, but I had this vague idea, well, I've seen us play terribly before and then do really well the next week, or next game. I was really clinging on to that, even though it perhaps isn't particularly a nice thing to think about. But let's start with the first goal, the Alonso goal over Bellerin. Let's start with Matt for this one. Was it a free kick? Should it have been allowed or not?
I think it was a foul, yeah. Obviously extremely biased, but I just feel if you're going to lead with your elbow and effectively slam him in the face to the extent where you knock him out, I feel like that would be a foul. Most other areas of the pitch, and there was no real need. I mean, he's always going to win the header. He had the height advantage. He had a running jump. But I just feel the force with which he sort of threw his elbow into Bellerin's head was a bit excessive and justified it being a foul.
Okay, Pete, what do you think about that one?
Yeah, it was a foul. Pretty straightforward. I mean, I don't think there's anything about bias there. I think anyone... Why more commentators haven't picked up on it, I can't imagine. How Alan Shearer can possibly say, oh, he's just being aggressive on Match of the Day. No, he's not being aggressive. He's shoving his elbow into someone's face. And as Matt said, without any need, he could have won it without doing it. Other than maybe not having the bottle to put his head in there, he decided to lead with his arm. And, comments like, oh, he's only got eyes for the ball. Well, it doesn't really matter. If you smash your arm into someone's face, it doesn't matter whether you're only looking at the ball. You've still fouled them. It's a foul. It shouldn't have stood.
Well, I was doing the commentary for By the Minute, and I had a slightly different opinion. I thought it was borderline, was the phrase that I've noted. I'm willing to change that opinion. I just thought he was just going for the ball. I didn't think it was deliberate, I suppose, is what I'm getting at. I didn't think the arm in the face was deliberate. I won't know that unless Alonso tells me differently.
A foul doesn't have to be deliberate to be a foul.
No, I see your point, but there's always this grey area, isn't there, with elbows and arms and jumping. This idea that you're just, you need to use it to get the lift and all the rest of it. And I think referees will let it go. I suppose it's not necessarily whether I think it was a foul or not, it's whether I've seen those kind of things given or got away with, if you like. And I think you could probably come up with some video evidence on both sides. So I suppose that was what I meant by... I'm not surprised it wasn't given. Let me put it that way. That would be my defence of my position. But it's not what I'm wedded to. It was just my first impression was I didn't think it was a foul. I thought it was heavy-handed for put it one way, but I didn't think it was a foul.
I guess I hated the way pundits used it to sort of support the narrative of Arsenal being weak or not turning up in the big games, or a case of Chelsea wanting it more. Which, whether or not that's the case, is completely irrelevant when Bellerin has a clear height disadvantage and gets slammed in the face, regardless of if it's a foul or not.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, yes, almost the moment it's happening, and then when you realise he is quite badly injured, and you think exactly that, they think, oh, that's just going to be used as an example of exactly what you've just said. Well, we can't say that for the second goal, though, when Hazard waltzed through our... Well, I can't really say through our players, because our players didn't bother making any attempt to get... Coquelin, I don't know what Coquelin's doing, letting him stroll past, stick a foot in. I mean, beautiful game and all that, but sometimes take him down 40 yards away from your goal, and it's not a problem. And then the rest of the players who we had to beat were scared to tackle him, because by that point he was much closer to the goal and indeed in the area. I mean, it's a great goal, but he'll score goals when he has to beat more men, even from inside his own half, which is where we picked the ball up from. Pete, any thoughts on that one?
I wonder if it in a half serious question as to whether they were thinking a little about Xhaka's red card earlier in the season, where he was sent off for a deliberate trip, which was nothing other than that, a trip. It wasn't violent, and maybe, they were thinking back to that, and, quite plainly someone should have brought him down, and should have brought him down quite deliberately. Maybe they didn't because they were a bit worried about that.
Yeah, Matt, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that could be, but I feel like Xhaka's was almost never within range of the player. But Coquelin, I mean, he literally bounced off him. I don't know how strong Hazard is. Definitely not strong enough to justify Coquelin literally flying off.
Yeah, he really did go, didn't he? That was a very odd... even in the replays, I'm not quite sure how he managed to go off it, sort of the trajectory and speed that he did.
And if he didn't want to risk a red card by sliding in cynically, at least just grab him or something. Yeah. I don't care if you do a full-length keeper dive and punch the ball away, just stop him somehow.
Because that was the thing. At 1-0, although it had not been a particularly good performance, and the points I think Pete made earlier about we were probably expecting not to win the game necessarily anyway, but But we were still in it, even if we weren't playing particularly well. At 1-0 down, there's always that chance something might happen. It wasn't looking particularly likely, but there was always that possibility. So, do something to try and keep the score at 2-0. I mean, I was going to come to this later, but the possession stats were hugely in Arsenal's favour. The number of completed passes also in Arsenal's favour. Even the number of tackles, believe it or not, was in Arsenal's favour. But none of that seemed to translate, to me at least, to ever looking likely to get anything out of this game. I mean, the third goal, I think, summed it all up. I mean, that was a shambles. I don't know what was happening there. Matt, any thoughts on that particular goal in general, that goal specifically, or more generally, just the performance of the team through that second half?
The goal specifically, I mean, just when you thought you'd hit rock bottom, check, of all the people he picks out, Fabregas. And Fabregas is there to finish it off. But, I mean, the performance generally, I thought we were decent until the first goal. I thought we pressed pretty well. I was pleasantly surprised with how quick we were. Unfortunately, that soon came to a grinding halt once they went ahead and wasn't seen for the rest of the game, really. But I thought the second half in particular was dreadful, really. We again tried the task of chucking on everyone. Our midfield was Iwobi and Oxlade-Chamberlain, I think. And if Chelsea had been a bit more clinical on the counter-attack, it could have been a lot worse than it was. So I don't know, really. I mean, deep down, I probably went into the game expecting to lose, but it just seemed so depressing the way it happened, and the enthusiasm is not there really when our league season now rests on securing top 4.
That's it. We'll move to the slightly bigger picture now. I mean, the Chelsea are a very good team. I think it's worth saying that. It's no disgrace losing to Chelsea, but we can control our own performance, and it was, I think, well below par and well below where it should be. The only thing that's keeping us in that top 4 race at the moment is the varying degrees of occasional incompetence from the other teams. Liverpool being the latest to also lose a game that perhaps they weren't expected to. In the commentary I did on By the Minute, I did say Arsenal looked like a lightweight team in a heavyweight clash, and whilst that has a certain nice little balance to it as a phrase, the way Coquelin, not the Bellerin thing, but the way Coquelin was, as you say, bounced off Hazard, I think summed that up. There's something mental going on, I think. I cannot see that the players don't have the ability, but they don't seem to use the ability they have when we really, really need them to. I mean, the only bright spot I could come out with the game was Welbeck coming on and looking reasonably useful again for however long it was he was on the pitch. Other than that, and I'm stretching, other than that, I couldn't see any reason to be particularly optimistic about our league season at all. And let's be frank, not very optimistic about the Champions League. We should get past Sutton in the FA Cup, but to be honest, beyond that, I wouldn't want to say anything else. Looking slightly wider then, Pete, we'll start with you. Any ideas about what our season's goals realistically can be? And the bigger picture, we need to get to it. How much longer can we carry on with things as they are, with the organisation being added as it is, let's leave it like that, when we haven't won a title for how many years it's going to be now, 13 years?
Okay, well, I'd like to finish above Tottenham, please, whatever.
Fair enough.
I do feel that's quite important and not something to lose. And, we without being unrealistic about it, well, let's see where we can go in the Champions League. And I know it's very unlikely, but let's, if we can get past Bayern Munich, then at least that will show a different side to us, won't it? That will maybe put a lot of our league form into perspective. Should we be able to get through a very big tie in a knockout competition like that?
I think it will. My concern with that is it will just be even more frustrating if we can do it there, but not on a rainy January at home to Watford. But I take your point that we've still got things we can aim for. We'll come back to the manager thing in a minute. Matt, what do you think about season's goals? Because I liked your point about you just don't have the enthusiasm at the moment for another fourth place or top four thing.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you've put into words something I've been thinking for a week or so now, and it's an interesting concept, as it were.
It is demoralising. I guess earlier in the season, when we weren't playing particularly well, you looked at certain players, and you thought they can probably carry us through. But there's really nobody there at the moment. I mean, Sanchez, I know some see him beyond criticism, but he seems to just refuse to pass anymore, giving up trust in any of his teammates. But more generally, I think top four is certainly a fight, assuming that a couple of the teams don't fall away. And I know it's obviously not what we want, but I think it's still important to come in the top four. The FA Cup, as has been the case in the last few years, gives us a sort of chance to get away from our disappointing league form, and whatever ill feeling there is, it's always still nice to go to Wembley and to be in the last stages of that. And yeah, as for the Champions League, I guess we've got nothing to lose really. Throw everything at that and see what happens. But it's just, maybe if this was a one-off, but it seems to be the case that we get to this stage of a season pretty much every year.
Yeah, I think that's leads on to my next sort of area of discussion about how long we can keep doing this, and something's got to change. And I don't think it's just the manager. Although I think that has to be a serious discussion, I think it also has to be the organisation, the way things are done. We no longer have this massive financial advantage over other teams. I know we had obviously the period where we didn't have that because we were obviously paying for the stadium and whatnot, but because the television money is so big now, that is all evening out a bit. And okay, Spurs, for example, it'd be interesting to see how they do with over the next couple of years when they've obviously got other stuff going on. But I don't think we can assume, if we don't change the way we are at the moment, I don't think we can assume a top four finish. Leicester was a weird thing last season, but I wouldn't be surprised if other teams start challenging more regularly. I know generally it's the same top four, or very similar, just drawn from a small pool, but I wonder if that might change as things equalise, when the team that finishes bottom of the Premier League gets whatever it is, 100 million quid now. Matt, do you, without going for the nuclear option, saying we should be getting rid of Wenger or separating, I mean, do you think that's an option? Do you think it's likely? Do you think it should happen? I'm talking at the end of the season, by the way, not now. I'm not
yeah, of course. I think the tone set from the board, and when the board are effectively, they've sort of absolved themselves of all decision and said it's up to Wenger how long he wants to stay. I just think that sets in a sort of sense of comfort and no real motivation to necessarily push yourself. And I think we're seeing that feeding down into the team. There's sort of been an acceptance of a certain standard, because obviously they know Wenger's not going to go anywhere, and because they know Wenger has such trust in the team, the players know that he's not going to, scream at them. Oh, hang on, I've got the door. You carry on without me.
Carry on. So, Pete, what do you think about this idea of the organisational change being, an issue that we need to deal with?
Well, I guess that depends on how satisfied or unsatisfied you are with the way things are, whether they happen every year or not. Personally, I'm not unsatisfied. I know it can be depressing. I know you can feel it happens every year, but I think what I try and tend to do, and particularly this season, what I'm thinking most is, we have Man City with Pep Guardiola in control and a vast amount of money, Liverpool with Jurgen Klopp in control, and Man U with Jose Mourinho in control and a vast amount of money, and actually we're still not doing badly compared to them. So, are we in as bad a shape as we like to make out sometimes, and do we need to make huge changes? Do we need to have a change? Because, if those clubs don't feel they need to have a change, if they think they're performing well enough, or those managers are performing well enough, then actually we're not doing too badly against them.
Well, there's an important difference with all of them, I think. That United, Liverpool, City, apart from the fact that two of them have won the league sort of not that long ago, the important thing there, of course, is they're three relatively new managers, so they've got the honeymoon period, and they do to one degree or another work with sort of directors of football and stuff like that. There's that different relationship. They don't quite have that omnipotence, I don't think, but they've got more time, I think, is I suppose what we're getting at. They've got a bit more leeway, perhaps.
But what I'm partly saying is that I think that they're the sort of people that people would say that's who we should have in charge of our club, and actually, well, they don't seem to be doing that well. So, or in comparison to how we're doing, and clubs with mostly better resources than we have. So,
no, I see the point, but and I've had similar discussions with people where people have said, "Oh, we should just bring these people in and they'll sort it all out." And I said, "Well, no, that won't happen. But what does need to happen, I think, is a significant, what's the word I'm looking for? A serious conversation about the structure, because I think my concern is that whilst those are I think we will see those teams go away from us potentially in the next year, 18 months, 2 years, whatever, if we don't, really address this now. I suppose that's my concern.
Well, then I suggest we wait until that happens then before we start worrying about that's what I mean, that we haven't seen the end of this season, have we, to see how other clubs have done against us, to decide whether we think a real change is necessary or not.
No, I understood, but I think if we do it too late, then we're behind the 8 ball again. I think Guardiola is not going to have the same season next year as he has this year, I think. I mean, we can only guess, of course, but
he may not. He may have the brilliant rest of the season for all I know. As I say, he may turn things around there, and they may go and win the title for all we know. That's what I mean. Can we wait to see what happens before we start commenting on whether there actually is a need for a change or a change that would be better than what we have got?
Well, I think we wait till the end of the season anyway. I don't think there was any suggestion that wouldn't happen, but I think my concern is if things look okay at the end of the season, it will be another excuse to carry on. This isn't necessarily completely what I think. I'm giving a slightly devil's advocate sort of tinge to this, but because I know this is what a lot of people think. But look, we'll leave it for there. We'll see. We'll revisit this in a couple of months, because I think that's a good point. We can see where we are a bit further down the line. Now, Matt is obviously having his leak looked at, which I'm sure is even less pleasant than it sounds. But I thought we'd pretty much done anyway. Let's very quickly look at the next game we have, which is at Hull. At home, isn't it? To Hull on Saturday lunchtime. Hull are in the bottom 3. They have won their last game, though, of course, against Liverpool. Perhaps slightly surprising. They've also they're inconsistent.
New manager.
They have a new manager. I mean, they were very consistent in they were losing lots of games before, but they've had a couple of wins in their last few games.
Who, in his last visit to Emirates, beat us 3-2.
Oh, well, there we are. Just what we wanted to hear.
September 2016, he was the manager of Olympiacos when they beat us 3-2.
Oh, of course.
I think he was also the manager when we beat them 3-0 in the return. But that was away, and with a Giroud hat-trick, which we needed to qualify, as I remember at the time.
That was quite a night, that one.
Yeah, so he's sort of got good omens and bad omens about him.
Yeah, well, I hesitate to say this, given what happened with our last home game against a team we thought we should beat, but we should still be beating Hull, shouldn't we? If we want to maintain any, good form, or start some good form, should I say? We don't want to lose 3 games in a row. That would not go down well. Do you see us having any particular problems with Hull, or should we be on the edge of our seats anyway?
I'm just pretty terrified at the moment, I must say. There is that chance that we will now, after having lost 2 games in a row, go and have another bad start against another team that we should beat and not be able to get it back. And as I say, it might be that Marco Silva's Hull at the moment are the team who can take advantage of us. And I'm quite worried about it, I must say. That's why I think that ideally we should be able to roll them over quite easily, but I'm not sure there's any guarantee of that.
Well, we've done quite a long pod, so I think we'll wrap it up soon. But just one question then: who's up front for you, Giroud, Sanchez, or someone else, or some other combination?
Not Giroud, please. No, nothing against the guy, just that I want us to get back to playing the sort of front three that we started the season at, with Sanchez up front and two quick, mobile, wide players. And we've got loads of them available at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I don't think any of us have criticised Giroud particularly. I just think we think he's been asked to do something which, when compared against someone like Sanchez, he's just not able to do it as well, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the kind of footballer he is, but it seemed an odd thing to put him back into that position last week, and I think, yes, I mean, for me, it's back to Sanchez, and as you say, some pacey wingers. The midfield is obviously an issue, but we'll cobble something together, and, to be frank, we should be beating a team that are in the relegation zone and have looked fairly ordinary all season. They've had a couple of decent results recently, but we've got to win. We've got to win, and we've got to start getting back on the horse, as it were, and just see how things go from there. But
if we don't, then we might as well give up on top four, as far as I can see.
I think because the other teams around us, apart from Chelsea, of course, have all had little moments and slips, and something, as I said, like Liverpool very recently. They're not going to keep doing that, and United are creeping up as well, having been a bit further behind. So. Well, on that depressing and worrying note, we'll leave it there. Matt obviously is getting himself sorted out, so we'll say thank you to him, and we'll see him next week, hopefully. Pete, thank you very much. Yes, Pete, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Matt.
And we will wish everyone a good week, and fingers crossed things get better. And we will be back with a review of Hull next week. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye bye.